BlackBerries worldwide went dark this week. What led to the death of the beloved Canadian phone? Let's get a brief history of the rise and fall of the BlackBerry and take a look to what's next. Sean Silcoff is on the line, reporter with the Globe and Mail and co-author of Losing the Signal, the Spectacular Rise and Fall of BlackBerry. Sean, it's a real pleasure to have you on the show.
Likewise. Good morning, Elias.
So let's first off, I know the BlackBerry, this is not something that came out of nowhere. They had said that, hey, we're going to shut down the services January 4th, 2022. But still, this week, what are some of the emotions that you're feeling with the news?
Well, it's funny. I think people have taken a walk down memory lane. It's kind of hard to remember for many, but this was the hot device. It's the phone that it's the device that got people off their laptops and their desktops and enabled them to send emails and instant messages wherever they were. And that was a revolutionary thing. If you go back to 1999 and 2000, I mean, when 9/11 happened, the only people in Washington who were able to communicate were those who had BlackBerries. And, at one point, Barack Obama had one. He didn't want to let go of it. Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, I think still was using a BlackBerry. And, there was a journalist from the Toronto Star, Susan Delacourt, who wrote the other day, the thrill of email on the move was exhilarating, even emancipating. And she said, it deserves a final salute, 2 thumbs up. For those of your listeners who might not have had a BlackBerry, I mean, the genius of this thing was that you could take it anywhere. It taught people how to type with 2 thumbs. It was stripped down. It was easy. It was fun, and it was super addictive to use. People called it the crackberry, and you'd go into an atrium where people were having lunch at a workplace, and everyone would be looking down at their laps, and they called it the BlackBerry prayer on Wall Street, which is where the BlackBerry was first successful about 22 years ago.
So, Sean, it's a device that people love. It's likened to an addiction. It's liberating. It gives you freedom. And then it dies a terrible death. What happened, Sean?
Well, this was, we told the rise and fall story. And, it was a perfectly designed product for its era when email was really widely used for the first time and there was no way to access it wirelessly. They made the experience fun and pleasing. It was the first mobile device people actually wanted and needed to use. But its downfall was, not just due to rivals with better products like Apple and Google. These companies also changed the rules of the game. BlackBerry had been pretty happy to play by those rules. For example, like the telephone companies never wanted the smartphone makers to have their own app stores. Mm-hmm. But when AT&T introduced the iPhone, they let Apple have an app store. And then when Verizon did the same thing with the Android phone, they let Google do an app store. And in fact, Google said, hey, you know what? Our 30% cut of the apps that we sell, you can have those. So all of a sudden you had these telecommunications companies who are heavily incentivized to push Android phones. And that really undercut BlackBerry. At the same time, management was pretty distracted and more focused on other things. I mean, because they made phones, they had to be doubling their capacity every year. So, and as we talk about in the book, there was a big schism that developed inside the company between the 2 CEOs, and that was still pretty raw when Apple came along.
We're talking about the death of the BlackBerry, the iconic Canadian phone, with Sean Silcoff. He's a reporter with the Globe and Mail. Sean, if you could tell us just a bit about internally, inside the company, the efforts that were made, because you mentioned the iPhone comes out and AT&T and that marriage with Apple and AT&T and how they work together on the networks and that kind of stuff, and how it changed everything within the industry. Can you tell us a bit about internally what the scene was at BlackBerry to try and compete against that?
Well, Verizon came up to them and they said, "Can you give us an Apple killer?" Because AT&T had the exclusive for the iPhone for 4 years. So BlackBerry came back. They wanted a touchscreen device. What BlackBerry came back with was one of the biggest product fails of all time in the tech world, which was a device called the Storm. Their version of a touchscreen back in 2008 was a screen that you actually the entire screen would click down. It was a mechanical thing. And they thought that people wanted the BlackBerry version of a touchscreen phone, which was a phone that clicked because people were used to using keyboards. The other thing is they didn't have the proper software to do a full computer in your hands, which is what the iPhone was. They had a pretty lo-fi version of an operating system. And people could tell almost right away, you know what, this just isn't the same experience that an Apple is giving. And also it was really buggy and it didn't work and they had lots of problems. And Verizon, returned a million of these. The first million that went out, most of them were returned. So it was a big fail for BlackBerry. They tried to perfect the Storm. They did a second Storm, and then they were working on the third Storm when the telephone company said, "You know what, just give us a proper touch screen." And by then the company started to try to get a software company, and they finally came out with a proper modern smartphone, but it took them 6 years from the time the Apple appeared until their BlackBerry 10, which is now the operating system's out of service as of this week. 6 years to respond. And in technology, nobody has 6 years to respond. By then, they were forgotten. Essentially, not many people wanted the BlackBerry, and they just couldn't build up that momentum to catch up to what Apple and Google had established.
A peak for BlackBerry handset sales, 52.3 million in 2011. By 2016, 2017, it was under 100,000. Sean, as far as Canadian business failure stories go, where does this one rank?
It's pretty high, but but it's got a happy ending, more or less. Why do I say that? First of all, BlackBerry is still alive, and it's actually a big player in the connected car business, which could be, this company could have a real strong second life. So it's not dead yet. The product is dead, but also there was BlackBerry's downfall kind of led to this big bang, or helped this big bang in the Canadian tech scene. And in fact, if you look at the number one company last year, tech company in all of Canada that went public, it was called Magnet Forensics. It nearly doubled after it went public. The entire top management team is made up of ex-BlackBerry people. You look around Canadian tech, you'll see BlackBerry people running companies, on boards. So the impact has been far and wide. And I think there were some really important lessons that were learned that you see that have filtered out quite a bit across Canada. And, the Canadian tech scene is having this great moment right now. It's a record year for fundraising, for a record year for initial public offerings. Canadian tech companies are buying foreign companies like they never have before. So, this is kind of a long-term, the ending has not been so tragic as might have seemed the case, 5-10 years ago.
Well, Sean, that is so interesting, right? Because maybe the product is dead, but the company is still going. You give us the case that it's going strong. The leadership that has ended up everywhere else in the tech industry, quite the legacy that still exists for the BlackBerry. Sean, thanks so much for coming on the program.
Thank you. Great speaking with you today.
That's Sean Silcoff. And by the way, I've retweeted some of Sean's previous reporting about the rise and fall of the BlackBerry. So if you want to read more, head to my Twitter, @EliasMakos, and you'll find Sean. I've just retweeted him, and you'll get a link to some of that reporting. The book that he wrote, co-authored, Losing the Signal, The Spectacular Rise and Fall of BlackBerry.